We'll get started to move this forward. My name is Skip Sanzeri. I am co-founder and COO of QuSecure. You're welcomed into Quantum Security as a service for the healthcare enterprise, where we're going to cover some of the quantum threats as well as a variety of solutions for healthcare. I'd like to introduce now Dave Crothamer, my co-founder and CEO of QuSecure. Dave, take it away.
Thanks, Skip. Well, welcome everyone. We've got a good crowd from all across the world. So today we're going to talk about quantum security as a service for the healthcare enterprise. We're also going to go into some of the threats in healthcare and how we can help facilitate the solutions to those. Next, Pat. So just a little bit about the speakers. My name is Dave Crothamer. I'm founder and CEO of QuSecure. My background, I was a CIO in telecom. I went on to found a company that became Oracle's largest cloud partner. And we have Nardo. We're fortunate enough to have Nardo Manaloto today. And he was the prior director of innovation at Kaiser Permanente, has extensive experience in healthcare. And then Costa Vilk, who's one of our founders. He was CEO and founder of iSpan. But let's skip to the next slide. Just a little bit about quantum. So I'm going to give you your 90-second PhD in quantum physics and quantum mechanics and quantum computing. So a standard conventional computer has a really small word size. It's like 64 bits. So we solve problems linearly with conventional computers. But enter a quantum computer where a bit can be 1, 0, or anything in between. It's a feature of quantum mechanics. It makes a great bit. We string these bits together with another form of quantum mechanics called entanglement. And what we get is a really long word size. So instead of 64 bits solving a problem, a 73 quantum bit computer is equivalent to 2 to the 73rd. The word size is equivalent to all the data stored in the world in the last year in one instruction. So this is fantastic for solving these problems we've never been able to solve, like complex neural nets, molecular simulation, pharma. There's a lot of excitement about the things we can do with these quantum circuits, but these quantum circuits are also really good at prime number factorization, which is the foundation for much of our security. So we will at some point in the near future be in a situation where these quantum computers will be able to cut through our forms of security. Next. So a little bit about the problem. So cybersecurity is integral to healthcare operations. Healthcare systems are the most hacked systems in any industry, and our current cryptography is vulnerable, and it has to evolve to counter these emerging threats. Our communication networks and data centers provide perfect targets for these hackers. They're highly distributed. They're spread out everywhere. We're adding these cloud platforms like Amazon and Google Cloud and Microsoft Azure, and the communication between those data centers are highly vulnerable. Another big challenge in healthcare is we're adding an alarming number of devices, IoT sensors and devices, and they're all vulnerable to attacks. They all have PII, personal identifiable information, and if you attack any one of those nodes or any one of those devices, you can gain access to that data and gain access to the rest of the network. Another challenge we face is we start really leaning on artificial intelligence and machine learning in these solutions that they have to communicate back with terrestrial data centers, and that communication is vulnerable to attacks, specifically quantum attacks. So the healthcare industry requires a practical cybersecurity solution that can be integrated across all components of the network. Next, Pat. Just a little sense of the magnitude of the problem we're facing. So this is Christopher Wray, is the director of the FBI. And his comment recently was the scale of these cyber threats is something we have never seen before. I was on a call with Christopher Wray a couple of weeks ago, and it's clear that from the FBI's perspective, cyber is job 1, 2, and 3, and there are very legitimate, significant concerns. So we've got to protect our networks, but the other thing we have to really protect is this steal now, decrypt later, because ransomware, theft of data is a huge problem. It's said that one foreign nation state has already harvested up to 25% of the global encrypted data. They're sitting on that data. They are waiting for it enough quantum bits to decrypt it. And so it puts us as an enterprise, a healthcare enterprise, in a significant risk. There's a likelihood that the data has already been taken. And when that data is decrypted with enough quantum bits, it's going to present a huge challenge. China and Russia are way ahead. China's already secured their, China's already secured their military and government networks from quantum threats. And so, we in healthcare really rely on a continuous flow of communication. And if that's vulnerable, or we lose any vector of that, it puts all our delivery systems at risk. And then the interception and theft of devices. Attacks will target network weaknesses to compromise critical medical devices. So next, I'm going to hand it over to Nardo, and Nardo's going to talk specifically about the threat vectors in healthcare and the landscape. Nardo?
Thanks, Dave. Glad to be here. I'm Nardo Manlotto. I'm a general partner of Qubits Ventures at Quantum Tech Fund and former director of innovation at Kaiser Permanente. The areas I'll be focusing on are basically the current state of healthcare cybersecurity, the security challenges in this industry, and also the vulnerabilities. I'll be also discussing the healthcare security risk and give you several examples, and also my thoughts regarding the path forward. Next. So let's take a look at the current state of healthcare cybersecurity. The HIMSS 2020 cybersecurity report pretty much reported that 70% of hospitals right now experience significant security incidents within the past 12 months. So in that survey, the impact of those security incidents included IT operations disruption, 28%, business disruption, 25%, definitely a lot of data breaches, 21%, and this one is a significant one, financial losses at 20%. So you can see cybersecurity from a current state perspective definitely has a lot of impact. So let's take a look at how the healthcare network is set up for failure. So one thing that we're doing is we're expanding our attack surfaces. Well, what does that mean? So we have many systems. We are in the process of doing a lot of digital transformation, digitization of manual processes. And in healthcare, ever since I've been in the innovation space, we've been doing a lot of innovation, trying to replace a lot of legacy systems. So the next point there is, let's talk about the legacy systems. We have many legacy systems that are outdated, not only outdated, but the security is outdated. We have a lot of duplications, so we need to actually look into either replacing them, modernizing them, or just fully removing them out of the network and putting in new modern systems that have more modern security architecture. The other piece is everything is really under prioritized for cybersecurity. If you look at the competing priorities of healthcare, just let's take a look at COVID, right? So we have healthcare has a finite amount of resources, and we're looking at the challenges of how to handle the COVID situation. So everything is going towards that from a funding standpoint. It's also under prioritized mainly because it's underfunded. If you look at the cybersecurity budget, it is only 5% of the IT budget at this point. Other organizations outside of healthcare, I've seen anywhere from 10 to 20% being funded from a cybersecurity standpoint. Next. Healthcare is definitely primed for attack. If you take a look at this CB Insights chart right here, healthcare is showing up as #1 from a data breach standpoint, compared to IT, finance and insurance, public administration, manufacturing, retail, and education. And why is that? I think we have valuable data, we have a lot of valuable data. So let me give you some tidbits about how much data healthcare has. So the amount of global healthcare data is expected to increase dramatically by year 2020, right? So it's already 2021. I'm giving you some statistics that I know of. Early estimates when, during 2013, we were already at 153 exabytes of healthcare data generated that year. So what is an exabyte? An exabyte is 1 billion gigabytes. So 2020, we generate 2,314 exabytes. So that is a lot of data that healthcare generates. The other piece of information here is every second, an exponential amount of healthcare data is generated and mined for valuable insights. Today, approximately 30% of the world's data volume is being generated by the healthcare industry. So 30% of the world's data volume is being generated by the healthcare industry. Imagine that. By 2025, the compound annual growth rate of data for healthcare will reach 36%. So if you look at that data scenario, then I'll talk to you about, PHI being valuable. It's more lucrative than credit card information. It goes for a price of anywhere from $10 to $1,000 per record. So just on these two combinations alone, there's definitely a lot of people interested in doing something with that. So the data breaches in healthcare is also pretty high cost. So it's been, for this 11 straight years in a row, healthcare is the most expensive out of any industry. And then, of course, because healthcare, from a perspective of being ready from a cybersecurity standpoint, we are actually slow to respond. 236 days to detect a data breach and 93 days to mitigate the damage. So if you look at that, it's definitely primed for attack. And from a proactive perspective, it's definitely not there. Next. Let me give you a few security risk examples that I pulled out of healthcare IT security here. Network breaches. Harris County, they had an EHR breach. 26,000 records were from jail patients were exposed. We also have open source TCP/IP stack. So meaning a lot of these TCP/IP connection also was discovered having critical vulnerabilities. Legacy system-wise, we have a legacy attack on the medical device side. So again, I talked to you earlier about legacy technologies, and this is just one example. We have many, many systems that are running, COBOL programs. Some of them are even in old mainframe application that can do really hardcore security. Let's take a look at also the at-risk medical devices, which includes PACS systems, radiotherapy systems, and even HL7 gateway. So an HL7 gateway is really the data exchange that healthcare uses to exchange data between partner organization, internal or external. So that is also at risk for hacking as well. And then, of course, the one that is quite concerning to a lot of healthcare organizations are medical and IoT devices, mainly because they could pose as a patient safety issue. A few examples here: FDA recalls Medtronic insulin pump, so that's one medical device. Another one is millions of IoT devices poses remote attack. So let me tell you what an IoT device is. So we're doing a lot of telehealth and remote patient monitoring in healthcare. And this has to do with IoT devices, medical devices, and even wearable devices. So the last thing I want to talk about there is look at the security breach from Apple, where 61 million Fitbit and Apple users were exposed to a data breach. That is a significant amount. Next. So what's the path forward? One is the healthcare industry needs to definitely place a greater value on cybersecurity. Since they generate the most data, they have a need to care about patient safety. They definitely need to place greater value on cybersecurity. In order to do that, they need to proactively invest in security protections. They also need to increase IT cybersecurity budgets. significantly, I would say, and probably close to or even surpass the other industries. They also need to keep on modernizing IT infrastructure. This one is always a challenge because it's an ever there's always a need to modernize IT infrastructure, but in terms of where it goes from a priority of budget standpoint, it's always low in the totem pole. The other one is sunsetting old legacy systems. We have a lot of that, and I think we need to consolidate or sunset a lot of these for more modern system. And then the last couple of things here is really to explore new post-quantum cybersecurity approaches. It's always better to look at innovation from a leapfrog standpoint. You know, they're probably, healthcare is probably doing a decent job on the cybersecurity side of things, but it's still not adequate enough. So they need to explore new post-quantum cybersecurity approaches. And part of that, to be successful, you need to train cybersecurity staff in these post-quantum solutions. Next. Turning it over to Costa at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and hello, everyone. My colleagues really did a great job outlining what the dangers are and how quantum really impacts the industry, but more specifically, how the industry is functioning itself right now. I'll jump into more on the practical aspects of it and what it is that we're doing to guard against the next generation of threats, especially threats against data and communication systems. So next, please. Thank you. So as we talked about it, we've got in the healthcare industry specifically, there are so many vectors that allow attackers to come in and really look at how the data is being used, how it's being driven. It's valuable, of course, and the attackers are highly incentivized to go after that healthcare data, not only because it's monetary value, but also because of its aggregate value in itself, where they can derive either insights and other information from that data, in addition to being able to leverage individual identities, accounts, and information. One of the major problems, as all of the industry is shifting, is really around how do we protect that data, both at rest and in transit. In other words, where it's stored, how it gets to places, and how it's digested. Because of that, NIST is a standardization body that's actually looking specifically at how do we protect our data and our encryption and cryptographic systems against upcoming future threats, and how do we really protect that data in addition to the controls that we typically place on identity and identity management, networks, network viability, and it's driven by the need to actually protect the core of what is important to us, which is that very important PHI data, of course, and especially when you look at compliance and other aspects of it. So let's jump on to the next slide, please. So in addition to the value of the data that gets stolen, we talked very briefly about SNDL, which stands for Steal Now and Decrypt Later. Any data that was stolen or compromised in the past, even if it were encrypted, is now actually in danger of being decrypted using the brute force of available to quantum computers. And of course, that means that from the regulatory and compliance standpoint, anything that was assumed to be safe as it was stolen because it was in an encrypted state may no longer be safe. So as brute force capabilities really come online with and are leveraged against data previously stolen, we will actually see it pop up on dark web for sale more and more. And And that creates a new danger in itself, because the companies that thought that they were compliant or have been able to mitigate the risks, or assume that the risks were mitigated because the data was in an encrypted state, may now actually have to change their stance on how they describe whether the data is still protected or not. And of course, our healthcare data lives with us our entire lives, right? It's as valuable when you're a kid as it is valuable when you're an old person. And of course, these data breaches are really designed to not only steal the data, but also cause a lot of disruption and other compromise. So anything that we look at right now, we really need to look at how do we protect it for the long term, especially considering the fact that healthcare data needs to outlive the lifetime of the person that we're trying to protect. So let's skip to the next slide, please. So when we look at data protection, the easiest way to look at it is to simplify it to the simplest form. One is, how well can we protect that data itself? In other words, how well can we generate cryptographic keys that are resilient to attacks, both classical that are happening right now, and future attacks from quantum machines and quantum compute power, and other attacks that we're seeing or are able to predict in the future, like machine learning and automation, and other types of attacks. And of course, the other part of it is, because data moves, it's never static. It needs to be used. It needs to be digested. It needs to be useful to us. That means that we have to get it safely to where it needs to be, so that it's actually useful to us in our everyday lives. So when we look at it from the two core perspectives, it's a matter of how well do we protect that data, and how well can we generate the keys to protect that data, and of course, can we get it safely to where it needs to be, so that it's digested by people who need it, not by attackers that are trying to compromise it. So let's jump to the next slide, please. Because of that, we looked at the entire process very holistically, at the entire data lifecycle process very holistically. In other words, we look at how it's generated, how it's digested, how it moves to where it needs to be, and how can we keep it more secure throughout its entire lifecycle as it's stored, moved, etc. We looked at all of the major attack methods against it as entire families, and we looked at how can we negate attacks from cryptanalysis, where they're able to force errors or derive information about keys before the data is encrypted, and how it can be used to protect that data as the random numbers are generated to seed the cryptography itself. Then we also looked at how does data move, and created specific secure protocols with zero trust architecture around authentication and authorization of access to data, and trust relationships between the entities that are going to be using it or communicating that data between each other. So we created a safe and secure process around that data movement itself. And of course, when we look at the enterprise, that data protection needs to be always reliable, available, accessible in our everyday world. So for that, we have continuous mission architecture. It means that no matter what happens to, even during a disruptive attack, something will continue to be there and will continue to work as attackers leverage all of their resources to try to try to cause harm. So in short, we're looking at how do we continue to maintain that availability through our quantum constellations. How does it power data that's being stored away from attackers, even if they're able to breach the perimeter and get at that data? We want to be able to ensure that they're not able to leverage that stolen data and decrypt it at a later time. And of course, we do that by better seeding it using quantum technologies, and then during the communication process around how do we get it there safely. We actually have moving target and other advanced methods of protection that prevent the attackers from being able to leverage machine learning, pattern detection, and other things like that to be able to connect into the applications that then need to use that safe and secure data. And of course, we deploy through software. It's an easy integration process, and we try to make it relatively seamless. Let's jump onto the next slide, please. So when we look at how we design it for the healthcare needs and how it's going to be used and digested, we'll look at all of the network applications and devices, because at this point we're heavily leveraging AI for data communication, data processing, and digestion. We are networking with IoT devices, air-gapped networks, especially when we look at the operating theater, where those devices are still open to compromise, but we want to make sure that the data itself is not. Secure and available networks with being able to continue to stay resilient even against extremely disruptive threats. And of course, by building trust between the devices, accounts, and applications that need to be able to access that data and really use it for in our everyday lives. So let's jump onto the next slide, please. So just as a quick recap, we seed the cryptography that we use, especially for data stored at rest, but also data as it moves around. We seed it with a quantum process, which is the highest form of entropy available. And of course, everything is standards-based, standards-driven. We follow very closely and work hand in hand with NIST on their NCCOE as part of the next generation of quantum search, post-quantum resilience search specifically. Deployable, the cryptography that we generate can be digested from the cloud or as an appliance, or in any number of hybrid scenarios. And of course, it integrates well into existing applications, devices, and processes, and then of course, when we look at the data movement, we want it to be effective not only against existing man-in-middle and relay attacks, where the attackers try to steal that data and strip out useful content while it's in motion, while it's moving around. And for that, they leverage all kinds of attacks. Now we're also seeing automated AI and machine learning driven attacks. So we actually have methods of protection against them by preventing statistical analysis and other kind of studies that would be able to predict behavior or leverage it within the protocol itself. And of course, that opens us up to be a useful partner for any kind of storage, all the way down to file and block level, object-oriented, so we can actually protect databases, data loss prevention systems, archives, cloud-to-cloud failover, and a whole stack, whether it's on the edge platforms or IoT devices, or traditional computers, laptops that doctors access every day. And of course, as part of what we do introduce cryptographic agility, which really means that we're able to change cryptography on the fly and manage it very actively. So essentially, it's a way of saying that we're able to make cryptography smart rather than static like it used to be for the last several generations. And of course, part of the hurdle is how do we, and part of the hurdle that we've been thinking about is as networks continue to evolve and move to quantum resilience, what do we do with existing legacy networks? For example, some of the equipment is still useful, and it's going to be useful for a long time to come. So how do we get that those devices, that equipment, those networks talking to more resilient quantum networks? And we do that through legacy device integration. So what we do is we create a process where we create a strong level of authentication and enforce actually the devices, even legacy devices, to talk at the highest level of security that they're able to talk at, and then we control it through. And then, of course, we control it through trust relationships between each individual devices. So let's jump on to the next slide. Yeah, and we have been recognized as one of the leaders in quantum cybersecurity, more specifically, one of the two top leaders earlier this year by CB Insights and other publications. And I think I will wrap up with this and open it up for questions.
Great, thank you to the team. Fantastic job. We are going to move into some questions now, and I will read the question. And Dave, I'll let you quarterback the answer on who should do this. So we've got a variety of questions, and here we go. There's a question about why are people attacking healthcare? What are they hoping to gain there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of fronts. One, attacking healthcare is super lucrative, right? I mean, you can resell these records for significant sums of money. And if you think about it, like, there's layers of reasons to hack and control healthcare systems. The first is, if I control the systems you're using, I mean, I can create a huge amount of havoc. And some nation states are just looking to create havoc in our systems. So, I mean, you think about it, if I could enter your systems and change your blood types before you're having a test, it could create enormous chaos in our systems. So I think, one, it's very lucrative. Two, it's a very powerful way of controlling an economy. And our bad actors that are involved want to control our economy and bring it to its knees.
And Dave, I would add, there was an attack. This was, I want to say, circa 2010. There was a worm or malware that leaked out of the Ukraine, ended up in the UK hospital system, and people actually died because they took the hospital systems down, and people that were going to emergency rooms had to be rerouted, and some of them didn't make it. So there's a lot of damage, obviously, that can occur by any attacks.
Another thing, Skip, so a lot of the hacks that we're seeing today, nation state hacks and attacks, are really practice sessions. They haven't really begun what's going to happen, and that is taking down our power grid or attacking our fundamental systems. And so we have to be very diligent in terms of protecting ourselves from what could happen. And that is a complete failure in these systems because they've been taken over and co-opted.
Absolutely. Okay, next question. Will the recordings be made available? Yes. For anyone that has registered, you will get a copy of the recording as soon as it's done. So we'll have those out to you over the next few days. Another question. Has anyone devised a quantum resilient encryption algorithm, either public key or block cipher?
Yes, so NIST has been working on it since 2015, and they started with 81 different algorithms, and they've been testing them thoroughly. They're down to only a handful, and new standards will actually be released sometime over the next couple of years. Now, we're working with them on practical applications of those algorithms through their Center of Excellence around cryptography, so we partner with them heavily. This has been an international effort with ISO organization and a lot of universities and enterprise engagements coming in to really vet out the new forms of cryptography.
Great, thank you. Michael says, I would like to talk with you guys. Quantum security seems the perfect fit for us. Fantastic, Michael. You see Dave's email address on screen. If you can send an email to dave@qsecure.com, that would be great. We'd be happy to talk with you. Another question. I understand how QSecure protects from an encryption standpoint, but how does this prevent a mainstream OS encryption cyber attack?
Yeah, let me grab that, guys. So we've got the quantum threat, but we also have a host of threats right now in key generation and key transmission. So right now, when I generate a key, I generate a session key on a pseudo-random number. These are vulnerabilities we have today, and you can use AI to decrypt that. And you can also use side channel, man-in-the-middle attacks to currently do certificate authority takeovers like we saw with SolarWinds. So there's a whole host of existing attacks that we protect against that you have problems with right now. And we have to move to a better architecture. So we address the existing problems and the future attacks.
Thank you, Dave. Another question. In a traditional model, we might expect an encryption standard to stay relatively secure for most threats for a couple of decades. Do we anticipate existing quantum-resistant encryption, say AES-256, to stay secure for that traditional horizon? Or do we anticipate this horizon to be greatly shortened with the advent of quantum, even with quantum-resistant encryption, thus the need to move to post-quantum sooner than later?
This is an excellent question, guys, because theoretically AES-256 is secure, although Grover's, which is a quantum algorithm, can cut the efficacy in half. So you can cut AES-256 to 128. The problem is not necessarily AES, which is symmetric cryptography, but it is the key transmission for AES. So right now we have huge vulnerabilities when we generate a key and transmit it to AES. And this is where the threat is real. It's right now. So we could argue AES is a secure encryption protocol, unlike symmetric like RSA or elliptic curve, which are in blockchain and can be hacked with quantum computers. But the key transmission is very real. It's a very real threat, and it needs to be addressed now to further fortify AES. So what we do is we replace the asymmetric cryptography and key transmission, but we fortify AES so your systems that are using it have fortified quantum secure channels. Great question.
Thanks, Dave. Another question, ransomware seems like one of the greatest threats to healthcare. Could quantum computers be used for ransomware attacks? And even if the data is stolen, would we expect attackers to use it again for future gain?
Yeah. So guys, one thing, so when I steal your data, ransomware, quantum computers will be able to decrypt the keys and then theoretically decrypt that data. That is a real threat. So if you continue with your current form of encryption and that data is stolen, when it is stolen, it is vulnerable. It is sitting on a server somewhere else. And theoretically, they will be able to, these bad actors, decrypt that data and then release it. So what we do is we fortify that data for quantum security now. So if it is stolen or exfiltrated, it is secure from those attacks. And this is really important that companies address this issue right now, because every day you go on without addressing this issue, your data is leaking out the door and it's going to be exfiltrated and it can be cracked in the future.
Yeah, I think, Dave, there's the adage that there's only two types of companies that have had their data stolen and admit to it, and companies that have had their data stolen and don't admit to it. So yeah, the threat is huge out there. Another question, as a healthcare provider, what should we do to start thinking about the quantum threat? In other words, what steps would be, what's a good way to get started?
That's a great question, guys. So what you do is you work with us to help identify the most vulnerable applications or layers within your system, and then attack those. Now, one of our key benefits at QSecure is we do cryptographic switching, so we can have old legacy stuff and sit on the same network that we protect with quantum security. We're the only ones who can do that. And so we identify those key threat vectors. It might be an MRI system, it might be an EHR system, and then we help secure those, but let them live within the ecosystem that you already have, which is really, really critical to deploying these technologies. If you don't have that functionality, then to upgrade to these quantum systems, you have to upgrade everything you have, which is not going to happen. So it's identify the key and critical systems and then upgrade those, but let them live within your legacy networks with our crypto switching capability.
Great, thank you, Dave. Another question, does this solution utilize quantum key distribution, or is that still just theoretical at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. Great question. So quantum key distribution is traditionally believed to be, or positioned to be, photonic entanglement over fiber. So we do not use that. We use digital quantum key distribution, which is doing it digitally. So there's a lot of limitations with the photonic entanglement. It's only runs over fiber, line of sight, but we can do it digitally in software. So we can distribute it anywhere at high speed to any device digitally in software. And we believe it's really, really critical that organizations adopt what we call digital QKD, which is what we do. So it's not expensive, it's inexpensive. You load it out in software and it can get to any device. But really, really good question.
Next question, if healthcare records are stolen, what types of data would be included in the theft? And in other words, how could the stolen data be used based on the information that's taken?
Yeah, I mean, think about it, guys. This ranges everywhere from your blood type to, the one piece of data you cannot anonymize is your DNA. I steal your DNA, I can identify you anywhere at any time. And so it's health paths, it's my ability to manipulate your healthcare data. And it can be a wide variety from imaging. Nardo said 30% of all the data on the internet is healthcare related. So there's a lot of imaging data that would be very useful to help develop a profile of you and then do something nefarious with it. So yeah, it's just an unlimited opportunity to manipulate your healthcare record and data and then capitalize on that for nefarious purposes.
And Dave, I would also add the financial component, because with many healthcare records, there are a lot of financial information there as well, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, sometimes bank records, payment systems, etc.
Yeah, I think even if you think about it, even if someone had your healthcare data, they can use it, foreign nation state can use it to blackmail you. I mean, they've stolen data from OMB and foreign nation states. So if your healthcare or medical records get out, it can be used in really bad ways.
Absolutely. There's a final question, but I think it's sort of been already answered about if the data is stolen today. What are the risks the attackers, what are some of the risks as to how the attackers would use it in the future? We just covered that, Dave. So that's all the questions. So Dave, I'll turn it back over to you to close it up.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you everyone for coming. This is a really exciting area and there's a lot of opportunity to get in front of the curve. And we're about creating a better future where privacy really instantiates. And that's our goal as a company, just to create a safe world out there. But unfortunately, we need to get going on these things and be proactive and really take this seriously. So if you have any questions or you're interested in any kind of guided walkthrough on how to do this, feel free to reach out to me or anyone on the team, and we'd love to help you and love to guide you through that process.